Hi, I'm Laura Ferrero, and this is Stories in Harmony, where we'll talk to people from all walks of life and hear their stories. We'll learn about obstacles they've encountered and overcome along their path, why they do what they do, and a whole lot more. The hope is that these stories will inspire you on your own journeys. Today, we sit down with Annika Rose, a gifted singer-songwriter from Los Angeles. Annika has quite a fascinating story, and we talk about how she started singing when she was 8 years old and ended up getting signed to Simon Cowell's record label in her early teens as part of a girl group, which was subsequently dropped from the label, and a lot of the challenges she's faced navigating the music industry. We also talk about her time during the pandemic, which was unlike any other experience that I've ever heard of. She lived in a very unique family situation, and one day while out taking a mental health walk during lockdown, she was actually hit by a truck and ended up in the hospital and had to overcome that as well as many other things to pursue her music and her writing. She has a lot of music and videos that she's going to release, which are really exciting and creative and groundbreaking. The first single is Bruises, which I'm sure you'll check out and enjoy. And now I hope you enjoy my conversation with Annika Rose. So Annika Rose, we're so happy to have you here today. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we were just chatting before we were rolling. You grew up in LA and you come from a musical family, and you started doing your own YouTube videos when you were around 8 years old. What compelled you to do that?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I think obviously I just grew up in a very musical family. My dad plays guitar and was always sit in the living room and play me some songs, and my mom was a musician and she was always journaling and writing and playing the piano. And I think when you have that influence around you from a very young age, it just seems natural that somehow I ended up doing a similar thing. And I was living in Huntington Beach at the time, actually, because we moved up there from the valley for a few years. And during that time, I would sit in my bathtub and make my mom take out a recording device and record me singing some random covers and some crazy little outfits that I thought was like the coolest shit in the entire world, and put it on YouTube. And that was sort of the start.
Yeah, that's amazing. And did you have any thoughts of like growing an audience, or were you just doing it for fun because you loved singing and loved music?
I don't know if I could even process the fact that like that opportunity to have other people's eyes on you was even like prevalent, because I was so young.
Yeah.
And I knew my mom was recording me, but I didn't really know all of the implications that had in putting that on the internet and what could come from that. So it just felt natural. Just felt like, I always had the camera on me as a kid. I was like always in the talent shows and putting on dance shows in the living room and singing on the couch and writing weird little songs that I would sing a cappella in the living room. So, it just happened like that.
That's really fun. And what did come from that? I know, I'm probably jumping ahead. Maybe you can fill in the gaps. So years later, as a young teenager, you ended up getting signed to Simon Cowell's record label as part of a girl group, I believe.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Oh. So how did that all transpire?
So through those YouTube videos, this woman, I don't know how she stumbled upon my video, but she did. And she was the mother of a drummer who was in like a young band that was playing shows around LA. And somehow there was some form of communication that was directed at my mom, and they were like, we need a singer for the band. The singer just quit. And I was so adamant about being a solo artist. I was like, I am a solo artist. There's no way I'm going to be playing in bands and like performing rock music. I was like obsessed with Katy Perry. And she was like, just give it a try. Like, you don't know. let's drive down to LA, get in a rehearsal. There's another girl in the band. Maybe you guys will be best friends. Who knows? Maybe it'll be the worst experience of your life, but you won't know unless you go try. Yeah. I was like, okay, Mom, I trust you. So started rehearsing with this band. I immediately like fell in love with everybody. It was so fun. The energy that you get from playing with other people is just unlike anything else. Yeah. And I was 10 at that point. And through that, we played a bunch of shows all over LA, and our MD was a great songwriter, and so he would write originals for the band that we would perform. And then eventually I started co-writing on those originals because I was just intrigued by this thing and I wanted to participate in it as much as I could. And so we started playing shows around LA, and we were just doing like Zeppelin covers, and it gave me exposure to an entirely new genre of music that I didn't really spend much of my upbringing listening to, but obviously I was only 10, so still was introduced pretty early on. And we start playing these shows, and we're having a great time. We're playing like the Kibitz Room at like Cantor's Deli on Fairfax, like literally like 4 days a week. Like it was all the time. It was nonstop. Wow. It was so fun. And we actually did a cover of a Foo Fighters song where we like tried to recreate the music video, and it's honestly hilarious. And I kind of am angry that it's still on the internet, but it's definitely sweet to look back on. And we did this cover, and an A&R who worked for Sony Music in the UK, I'm 13 at this point, she had stumbled upon the video, and she was scouting for a girl band. And the girl band was supposedly going to be an alternative-leaning rock girl band where everybody played instruments, which is untraditional for Psycho. If you know what Psycho does with their boy bands and girl bands, it's like a group of...
A label.
Yeah, and they're all singing, and this was like a different setup because the guy who was involved in putting together this girl band, that was like his dream vision. It was like, let's pull together young, super talented musicians, get them in a room where they can shred and impress people at 13, and have them write songs and make the music and then launch them and whatnot. So that was the plan. And I think inevitably when you put 4 teenage girls in a room and they have to have legal guardians with them, which means that your parents are involved, there's bound to be some internal chaos.
Sure, yeah.
And boy, was there some internal chaos, because we did a showcase with this band that I was in before. It's called Breaking 27, 2 guys, 2 girls. And eventually we performed for the whole label team at a studio, and they decided, hey, we don't want to sign the guys, we want to sign the girls, and we want to go forth with this girl band vision. It's up to you if you want to leave the band. If not, we're going to keep scouting. So the bass player was the other girl. She was a dear friend of mine, and she had been in that band for years prior to me. She's a couple years older than I am. And so it was a very like emotional and sensitive thing for her to leave what felt like a family. For me, I was like, deuces. I was like, I'm out, let's go. And so I left. She eventually left. We scouted a drummer, scouted a guitarist. Everyone was super talented and really, really gifted at their instrument. But again, like I said, 4 teenage girls, and you're thrown into the fire, and you're thrown into the major label machine where you're writing all day, every day, and you're like, it's like blind dating. You're just going in with like this pop person, this pop person, this pop person, and you're supposed to like, you're expected to deliver a product by the end of the day. And when you're 13 with very minimal...
It's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, and it was also something that I'd never done that before. I'd always had an interest in songwriting, but to be a part of something where you are working with other people to tell real life stories, it felt like a lot of pressure to be more grown up than I was at the time and have had more experiences at 13 than I had had. Like, I remember being asked, like, you haven't like kissed a boy yet? Like, you don't want to talk, like, can we talk about that? And I'm like, no. Like, I just turned 13. I'm not out here like making out with like John in 6th grade. Like, I'm not doing that. And like, we don't need to write about that. And so it felt like I had to grow up a lot faster than the average 13-year-old so that I could go into these rooms and feel like I wasn't like subpar, or I wasn't like delivering what I was supposed to be delivering. And on top of that, trying to manage the relationships between 4 teenage girls, where a lot of jealousy was involved, and people felt like this person was being favored more in this area and this person being favored more over here, when really it's just like, no, everybody has their roles, everybody has their talents, everybody has a time and a place to showcase their talents, and yeah, it didn't work out for those reasons. Right. And the parental involvement adds an entirely different layer of complexity and negativity.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I can imagine. It's hard at that age for parents not to be involved, but parents have egos too and their own concerns, and it must have been quite a mix of circumstances that would lead to it maybe not working out.
Yeah, and during that time, the A&R who had initially scouted us, she was my age at the time, maybe a year older. I'm 20, and she and my mom fell in love during that, which was a whole other thing.
Yeah, during that time. So that's when that happened.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Because she was an A&R and she was working for Simon in the UK, and so she was like our everyday go-to person for questions and for sessions and for all of the stuff that we were doing. So we'd all developed a very loving, close friendship and relationship with her, because she was only a few years older than us, and she had this life and vibrancy and energy to her that just felt so exciting for us. And we even named the girl band after her, which is hilarious. Yeah.
What was it called?
It was called Did Alice Call? Because there was a running joke in the band, did she call it? Because we were so excited. It was all these problems. You're going to go on tour. You're going to do this. You're going to do this. You're working with this person today. And you're going to have a black limo pick you up from school as a surprise because it's funny. And that did happen. So we loved her. We were always like, did Alice call? Did Alice call today? And the time zone difference. And it was a running joke that, did anybody hear from her? What are we doing today? And yeah. And then,
Oh, and well, gosh, I mean, what was that like for you, having your mother fall in love with her? And did their relationship kind of blossom from there? And
my mom is a very selective person when it comes to who she allows to share her energy with and receive hers, and who she receives back. And I know that about her, and I knew that because I'm the same way. And I knew that she had a really strong connection with Alice, and she had sort of been managing my career up to that point, driving me to band rehearsals. She obviously was a musician, so there was a very close attachment to everything I was doing through her, because I was so young, and she was my guiding hand through everything. And so obviously the communication was pretty heavy between her and Alice during that time, just in terms of my safety and where I was going to be on Tuesday and all of these things. And so I had noticed that they had developed a really close friendship, and I admired that and I respected that, because it was sweet for me as a sensitive person who cares very deeply for my mother to see her have that friendship with people, but I know how sparingly that comes along. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really think much of it in the beginning. And then, it was like, okay, you guys you're going to London? You're flying to London? What are you flying to London for? What are you doing over there? Why am I not coming to London if you're flying to London? Mm-hmm. And my dad has a very demanding job, and he was spending most of his time working in Africa, so he wasn't home a lot. He's fantastic, he's my best friend, best dad in the world. And I was a very observant, sensitive person, still am, and I knew that their relationship wasn't the most exciting, loving thing in the entire world. But they were still together, and I just saw this childlike spirit emerge from my mom again, and I was like, that's weird. I was like, where? I mean, I respect it and I like to see it, but where is it coming from? Where, who, what? I don't know. And I did have running thoughts of that it was a possibility, but the implications that would have had at that time, if it were to be true in my own brain, were so daunting to think about that I didn't even allow myself to process that possibility. And
How old were you at that?
15.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And, obviously I felt really protective over my mother and how people perceived her if perhaps this thing were true. And I felt scared that I would be ostracized if people were to find out if this were a thing that was happening. And then I also worried about how I would view my mom in a sense, and not because of her sexuality. I'm a very, very open person. I don't think anybody even needs to define their sexuality. But it was more like, who are you? And like, we're best friends. Like, have you been lying to me about who you are?
Yeah.
And it was more that question of like, hey, I thought we were best friends. I thought you told me everything.
And I imagine you were concerned about your father too.
Oh my God. Just like so concerned. I was like,
Yeah.
no, like, and, I can understand he's an adult and he can handle things, but it doesn't make it any less hard. And, eventually, like, it all came to fruition and it was true, and there was a lot of change, and she actually ended up leaving the record company before we were dropped, for that reason, because they weren't really allowing her to be out here, which is where she could have been doing her job the best. And, and they were just running her dry over there with the time difference and the workload and her not being able to be here in the U.S., doing everything that she was expected to be doing. And so, just for that reason alone, I think would have been enough for her to leave the company. But then, of course, the additional layer of falling in love with somebody who's in another country. So she left before we were dropped, and that was sort of the beginning of the demise. And it was a very rapid fire demise post her leaving the company.
The demise of
the girl band.
Of the girl band.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And the relationships, just little fires everywhere.
Oh my goodness. That's a lot. And as a 15-year-old, I think a lot to process. And did it kind of alter your worldview a little bit? Like maybe what you thought might have been a safe space in your family kind of shifted under your feet?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a really complex thing to process, given the fact that I was 15 and there are a lot of other things that you're trying to process at 15. Yeah. So just like baseline stress level is already super high, and then you add that on top with all like the protective instincts and also the curiosity and the questions. It was a lot. And yeah, I think it did change the way that I view love. I think just having different examples of what that can look like in front of you and how quickly it can change or evolve. I think it was good for me to have experienced that. I mean, in retrospect, I'm happy everything unfolded the way that it did, but yeah, it was, I never thought that my parents didn't like each other, because they're still best friends. Like there's a deep underlying love and friendship there, which I feel lucky enough to say. So, and it's nice to see that even if the romantic connection between two people can fade over the course of time, that underlying unconditional love for the person and for what you shared together at a certain time is there, and somebody else can come and reignite that fire in you romantically at any stage in life. And I think that was oddly reassuring somehow.
Oh, I feel like that's a very adult and healthy way of processing it.
I mean, it wasn't what I thought when it first happened. I was like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. I was like, I need therapy. Please help me. What is happening? But the rational side of my brain knew that it was all for good reason and it was all with good intent.
Yeah, and that is one thing I've learned just, living life, is that there are certain things that happen and at the time they feel like your world is just falling apart, or it feels so big and earth-shattering and dramatic. But then as time passes, you realize that you gained something so valuable from it, that you learn lessons, that maybe connections were made that wouldn't have been otherwise, that just kind of alter the course of your life. And it's I don't know, it's part of what kind of keeps me sane in those difficult times. I've lived long enough now that I can look back and remember, like, oh, that does happen.
Right.
There's still some things that have happened where in the last couple of years of the pandemic that weren't great. And I'm like, okay, what's the good outcome going to be? I haven't figured that out yet, but you trust that it happened for a reason.
When did you come to that realization for yourself, and like when was like the pivotal turning point in your life where you realized that like every trauma and pain and unfortunate situation that you had to endure was actually for good reason, looking back?
Wow, that's a really good question. I lost someone very close to me, my boyfriend, when he was 27, and it was something that was a complete shock. It was an accident, a scuba diving accident.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, and sorry, I didn't mean to get so heavy all of a sudden, but I mean, it was probably it was easily the worst thing that had happened in my life at that point, and it was one of the hardest years of my life going through that, but. And of course, if I could choose, I would never have had that happen. But now looking back, like I actually had a friend who passed away in her mid-30s a few years ago, and her boyfriend was devastated. And I was somehow able, I think, to offer him some comfort because of what I went through, and certain aspects of life just became, like I appreciated them so much more, realizing firsthand that life is so fleeting, because when you're in your 20s, I feel like you just don't really have a concept of that. You sort of feel like you're going to live forever a lot of the time, and for better or for worse, and that just kind of, it really did make me, and it sounds a bit cliche, but it's true, appreciate the things that are really important in the relationships in life. And I still get worried and stressed out a little more than I would like to, but there's always kind of that undercurrent foundation of, oh my gosh, this is something that I learned through this experience, to really appreciate the here and now and who you're with, and not take everything so seriously because it's a gift. And that's just one of the things I learned from that experience. So that was when I was in my late 20s. And I mean, it happens still all the time,
I know, but that doesn't invalidate the pain that you had to go through in your own personal experience, even if it happens to a million people. Like that's your experience. And you had to find your own healing after that. And I think, I mean, I can commend you immensely for hearing you speak on it now, for what direction you leaned more into after having such a traumatizing experience, because for many people it can go the opposite way, and you can look for answers in the wrong places and for comfort in the wrong places. And I don't know your full story, but just sitting here with you now, knowing what you do for a living and how you speak about that experience, I mean, that's a true testament to your character and you as a person and your healing.
Oh, thanks, Annika. That's so sweet. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's one.
And I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Really, thank you so much. Oh my goodness. So, yeah, it's like, it's hard to move on from that sort of, but it's something I think probably like the experience with your mother, like you probably wouldn't have chosen to have that happen, but there are things now you're probably more open, like you said, to different, love in its many different forms, and how it could come at any time, and maybe a certain level of being more accepting of that, and not judgmental perhaps, so I do know a little bit about, I think, what happened during the pandemic, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think what happened, your father got ill and you ended up living in the home with your mother and your father, and is it your mother's new wife? Did they get married?
And my sister.
And your sister. A full house, yeah.
A full house, modern family. Yeah, so as I mentioned, my dad does solar energy for remote villages in Africa. He's incredible. He's the
Wow.
best ever. And he, yeah, an incident happened in the beginning of 2020 where he was out there and um, and he went to see a dentist, I think, and they injected like a needle into a nerve ending in his gums that paralyzed half his face. And so for that reason, he came home because he was like, I gotta fix the face. That can't happen. And found out when he came home that the blood work he had gotten done before he left, there was like something off with his blood cell count, and um, found out that he had cancer. And so, thank God his face got paralyzed because he would have been, because 2 weeks later, the lockdown.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Right. So he couldn't have
So he wouldn't have
traveled.
been able to leave the country,
Yeah.
which is terrifying to think about. So, again, everything happens for a reason. But
Right.
he came back, found out he had cancer, sat us down on the couch. It was a very emotional conversation, to say the least. And he's, he's the most optimistic person I have ever met, and like sometimes to a fault. But hearing the way that he spoke about it was so comforting because I am a very reactive person, which I'm working on. But I would have easily just like run into the street and been like, just like screamed at the top of my lungs. And he was like, it's gonna be cool. It's gonna be okay. We're gonna do this. Here are the steps. He's like very actionable. Situation presents itself, and he immediately is mapping out the steps on how to sort it, figure it out, get to the other side, whatever it is. And I think I'm learning that from him now. But yeah, he ended up going through cancer recovery treatment during the beginning of the pandemic, so like pre-vaccine, which was very scary because we all felt the pressure to, we can't be the reason he gets sick. So we were just like hyper vigilant about, just like everybody was, because there was so many like contradicting, conflicting information that was being put out there, and nobody actually knew what the right things to do were, to not get sick. And so it was really just like, all right, we're just going to be like confined to these walls. It's going to be okay. And he's going to go through the treatment. The treatment's going to work. Fingers crossed. And it ended up being a hell of a 2 years as a family. And like I said, thank God Alice, my mom's wife, who's my manager, thank God Alice and my mom and my dad all got along. They all care so deeply for
God,
each
I was
other.
wondering about that. If that would have been really difficult if that
Oh
hadn't
my
been the
God.
case. Gosh.
Yeah, and my dad is 15 years older than my mom, and Alice is 25 years younger than my mom. So their age difference is
Oh wow.
significant.
Yeah.
And so it was hilarious. I mean, I go through my camera roll sometimes and find the videos of like everybody maybe having a couple glasses of wine too many and playing games, and my dad cooking his like big cheese, like Swiss cheese fondue in the kitchen, like 3 glasses of wine, and everyone just laughing, playing darts, and like it honestly was. We have so many. I have so many fond memories of that time, for as difficult as it was. And yeah, I just didn't see anybody. I mean, I saw my boyfriend, who I'd actually just started a relationship with before the pandemic, which is a whole other can of worms. But he was the only person I saw, and his family was again also hyper vigilant, and he's still living with his parents, so I had to be careful for their sake as well. So it felt like a very mutual sort of like, we're all gonna do our best to keep this person safe and this person safe and this person safe, and make it work to the best of our ability. And we did, and he was okay, recovered.
Oh,
And
thank goodness. Is he doing well now? And
yeah, he actually moved back to Switzerland, which is where he's from.
Oh, okay.
So his family is there, and yeah, he moved back and splits his time between Switzerland and Africa, and then comes to see us whenever he can. But we grew incredibly, incredibly close during the pandemic. Like, developed an actual adult relationship with each other during that time. And because of all of the health stuff he was going through, and because I just had way too much free time on my hands, like everybody else, I started getting really into like health podcasts and learning about nutrition and exercise and cancer treatment and all these things. I started walking miles and miles every morning because I just had nothing better to do, and listening to hour-long podcasts on like I said, nutrition and treatment and all of these things, and actually eventually started having him get in on it with me, and he started walking 6 miles with me every morning and quit drinking and all of these great things. Not like he had a drinking problem before, but just like learning about longevity and what you need to do to like serve your body in the proper ways. And we, would go on these 2-hour walks together every morning and just connect, and I learned more about him than I have in 20 years.
That's an amazing byproduct of a very difficult situation.
Yeah, seriously.
And, I've heard a few stories of families who wouldn't have been spending time together otherwise.
Yeah.
And they, despite all of the hardships during lockdown and the pandemic, they're like really thankful for that. And it sounds like similar with you. You got to spend this real quality time with your dad when he was going through a really tough time, and you were able to support him, and I'm sure he benefited from those health podcasts.
I still send them to him every day, like religiously.
They're the best. Yeah, I listen to a lot of those too.
David Sinclair, my guy, my longevity teacher.
Oh, I don't think I've heard.
Oh my God, fantastic. Andrew Huberman Lab. I'm so deep in it now. It's become like a passion of mine on the side, just to learn about all of that.
Oh my gosh, I'm totally gonna do a deep dive after.
I'll send you everything.
Perfect. Yeah, my guy is Rich Roll.
I love Rich
You
Roll.
know Rich,
Love Rich Roll. Let's go.
He's amazing.
And that's so funny.
Yeah, so that's awesome. And then I know that during one of those walks, I mean, you were hit by a truck. Is that right? I mean,
yeah, that did happen.
It doesn't sound like a real thing, but Annika, so what happened? And you ended up in the hospital?
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. So I like I said, started walking. Just a product of the pandemic, going to bed so early because I'm bored, and then waking up so early because I went to bed so early, and I was like, what am I gonna do? So I just started walking all the time. And it's a habit now that I still continue to do every single morning when I can. And I really have made it a point, which now is getting a little bit hard because I'm putting out music and the workload is so heavy that I don't really have an hour and a half in the morning to just like not be on my phone or doing things. But I really made as much of an effort as I could to have that be my quiet grounding time. Don't be on my phone. If I want to listen to a podcast, listen to a podcast. If I want to listen to a record, listen to a record. But really don't be like this, twiddling my thumbs for an hour and a half. Like, ground yourself, walk, connect, all of those things. And that's what I did. And then in March, it was about to be my boyfriend's birthday. And I'd already gotten him a gift, but I was like, I want us to like have an experience together on top of this like tangible thing. And so I was like, who's coming to town? Who's on tour? Let's go see a show. And so I was looking at my phone like an idiot and trying to buy John Mayer tickets at the Forum. And I was crossing this intersection, and I was walking on Ventura Boulevard. And if you know Ventura in the valley, it's
busy.
There's a lot of cars that are going by, especially when you're walking in the morning. Everyone's going to work. And it was a 4-way intersection, and in my peripheral vision, I thought I was in the clear, and I stepped into the street, and I got hit by a truck.
Oh, Annika.
Yeah. So I lost consciousness, and my angel who was sent to me somehow, a woman who didn't even see me get hit, but saw me lying in a 4-way intersection, knocked out, came and she pulled me out of the street, and I was like just in and out of consciousness, and I got hit in the head and like chest, and so I had I don't even know what you would call it, like a wound, I guess, for lack of a better word, on my head that was so big it was covering my eye, so like I couldn't see out.
Gosh.
And I just I just remember being pulled out and propped up against the wall on the side of the street and thinking and saying, am I dead? Am I dead? Am I dead? Am I dead? To this woman who I could barely make out. And my phone, my contacts were open because I had just gotten off of FaceTime with my boyfriend. And so he was the last call. So she called him, and I don't, this is just what they told me. There was an urgent care down the street, and she was like, should I take her? And he was like, no, get off the phone with me, call an ambulance. And she called an ambulance, and then found my mom's contact in my phone and contacted my mom. And they took me to a trauma center. They took me to Cedars-Sinai Trauma Center. And I remember the scariest part being like, I don't know why this was the one thing that stood out to me the most during the thing that I feared the most during that, besides thinking that I was dead. But being in the ambulance with like in a very vulnerable and weak position, and having only men in the I don't know why it was such a sensitive thing for me, but they had, when you're a trauma patient, they have to cut you out of your clothes. And so I remember just feeling horrified that I was like bare in front of these men who I didn't know, in a position where I couldn't defend myself, and being so frightened of that more than anything.
Really vulnerable.
Just so vulnerable and so scared, and it felt like the longest car ride in the entire world. I think Cedars is in like Culver City or something, if I'm not mistaken.
West LA?
Or West LA, and I'm like in the valley, so it was a long car ride. And when I got to the hospital, I had my vision back, but they wouldn't allow anybody to see me for 7 hours. So I was like, Mommy, I was like, Mom, I'm like, where's my mom? And
yeah, even now, I still, if I'm sick or something,
oh my God,
I just want my mom.
Like, I want to hug.
Yeah, that's, oh my gosh, that's scary.
It was really scary, and like I couldn't breathe because I had bruised my ribs, and they had to like take me in to like get a CT scan and all these things. And you know, when you're in that machine, they tell you, take a deep inhale, hold your breath until like the thing goes off, and then you can. And I was like, I cannot, in my ribs, I cannot breathe. And I was like not dressed. They had taken everything off of me, and it was just too many stressors at once, and like not being able to comfortably inhale, and also panicking, which like you're hyperventilating, and being in a machine with like in this confined space. It was like, it was scarier than the actual accident, to be honest with you. But 7 hours later, they let my family in, and that was that. I was able to leave that night by the grace of God. Had to have these.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how the hell I didn't break anything or have a I don't know. I'm not like I'm a much more spiritual person than I am anything else, and that to me, I was just like, all right, it's like somebody somewhere is looking out for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I went home, and I, obviously was in a lot of pain for a few weeks, and they put me on this like crazy medication that just made me feel insane. But obviously it stunted the pain. And so, yeah, I was on this medication, and then I ended up like going back into the studio the following week, And my boyfriend is the producer on all my music. And so we had like this live recording session with all these musicians. And, any facility we would walk into together, people would look at him. I mean, my face was purple. I had a giant black eye. Wow. So everyone was looking at him. And I was like, guys, it's the truck. I promise.
Oh my gosh.
Because everyone, and we walked into the studio to record, and all these musicians, I was like introducing myself to this drummer and this guitarist. And and this is my boyfriend. They're looking at him like, hey man. I was like, by the way, fully got hit by a truck last week. Like, promise you there's nothing else happening. And yeah, that was actually on his birthday that we went to the studio. And that night I had gotten off of the opioids they'd put me on, because obviously I'm like trying to get off this medication. Yeah. I don't want to be on it. And that night I'm like, man, like, do people get withdrawals this like early after, being on something for only a few days? I was like really lethargic, and I was like, I must just be feeling the injuries and whatever. The next day I test positive for COVID.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, awesome. Really cool, with the cough and my bruised ribs. I'm like, okay, guys, what's happening? I was like, this many bad things isn't supposed to happen in this short amount of time, but
wow.
Yeah.
And so
it was just a whirlwind of.
So obviously you seem amazingly healthy and like you're doing really well, but at that time, how did you get through all of that and persevere and kind of keep your keep your spirits up in addition to your physical strength?
I have really amazing people in my life, thank God. My parents are sent from the gods. Like, they're amazing, and they're the most supportive and loving, compassionate people. And so I have that. And I had amazing friends who came to visit me. And I already felt lucky just for being alive at that point. So that in itself, I think, would have been enough to have some staying power and some positivity. And my boyfriend is, I don't even know where he came from. He's so incredible. And
great.
He's just an angel. And so he was there for me as much as my parents were. And he knows all the right things to say to make me feel better. And yeah, just the relationships I have with the people in my life, I think, was amazing. And I've spent a significant chunk of my like teenage years and very, very early adult life practicing gratitude, and I think that helped me through that. And also just like music, as cheesy as it sounds, like that is my therapy. That is my that's my safe space and safe release. And we were finishing music. We were finishing the record at that time. So I felt like I had a purpose every day to wake up and for something to be excited about.
Yeah, and is that the music that you're getting ready to release now?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's exciting. The Bruises, right? Bruises is coming.
It was so ironic that the song was called Bruises. And funnily enough, like a few days after I got hit, I had a photo shoot in the calendar. And this photographer, I was like, man, like, I don't know if you really want to capture this on camera. And he's like, why the hell not? He's like, it's a time stamp. Like, this is something that happened. Let's capture it. So I did a photo shoot with him. And then that was also right at the time we were deciding what the first single should be. And we decided on Bruises. And I was like, oh, it's so funny. And we didn't end up using any of the pictures because I think it kind of gives off the wrong message. And it's not about that. It's about actually something very, very, very different. And I didn't write it about myself or I guess I wrote it for myself partially, but about something completely different. And yeah, that's the music's coming out. I'm like, it's so surreal. I'm like, I wanted like to start crying, but
that's so exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
And is it sounds like it's an extended release plan. Like, is it? Can you tell us about how you're going to be releasing it all?
Yeah. To be quite frank with you, I'm not that many steps ahead of what's happening live. I know. I know what the first two singles are. I have a lot of other music that I'm finishing while those things are coming out. There's a lot of songs that are written. Not all of them are fully done yet. I'm still finishing as I'm putting stuff out, but there is like a significant chunk of work that will be following after the first two singles. And yeah, we're just doing things in a completely new way. It's a very experimental process this time around. I was independent for most of the pandemic and
I was wondering, did you write a lot of this material while you were on your own independently?
yeah.
And then, okay.
Yeah. A lot of it all of it actually that's coming out was written during the pandemic. But the stuff that I ended up actually releasing during the pandemic were just one-off singles because, as I explained, I've been in sessions for so many years. I had so many demos sitting in my notes that never would have seen the light of day if it weren't for the emergence of TikTok, which I now I can talk about a little bit more comfortably. But before I was like, I'm not putting myself on this app. I was so adamant. And eventually I realized that it was my only tool to showcase my work during the pandemic. And so I utilized it in the only way I knew how at the time. And whatever was sort of doing well through that were the stuff that I put out. And it was all independent and, shot DIY videos in my downstairs bathroom of my apartment and just did it all ourselves. And then obviously, started making more music that was like more present day storytelling about what was happening at that actual time period, and felt more connected to my music than I ever have, and started just like fleshing out a body of work with a very, very small group of creatives, because that's how I like to do things. And yeah, and then, I started doing stuff, exploring the Web3 landscape, and we're sort of blending both Web 2 and Web 3 through these releases and using them as tools to help elevate each other, which is brand new for me as well. And we shot 2 videos for the first 2 singles, but again, in a completely experimental way. We shot everything vertically, and we created like narrative pieces for basically each section of each song. So instead of doing like 2 long form music videos, we basically did 15-second music videos for each section of each song, shot vertically, with 2 creators that we found randomly on TikTok who aren't music video directors. We just really resonated with their art. They weren't from here. They don't traditionally create. They're not directors. And we liked their work, and we were like, hey, this is how we want to do it. It's really experimental. It's really weird, but do you want to fly out to LA and rent weird locations in downtown and just like play around and like go to vintage stores and find the pieces that we need for the props there and just like do everything ourselves? And luckily I started working with people who allowed a budget for me to be able to make that happen and make it all happen on my own terms, and all coming from my creative vision, without being veered in a direction that didn't feel authentic and natural. So it's a whole new experimental phase for me. But
that's exciting, and being authentic and creative, like that, just to me, that's what it's all about,
Of course, and anything for anybody.
Yeah, but unfortunately that isn't always the case.
Yeah. I'm very, very, very grateful and lucky to be working with the people I'm working with right now.
And is that, I know you mentioned earlier that kind of music kind of saved you. Is that what sort of kept you going and feeling motivated when all of these difficult things were happening? Just kind of seems like right in a row.
Yeah, I mean, that's always how it's been. Even when my mom and Alice were going through what they were going through, and the piano became my like safe haven, and it has stayed that way, and it is that for me, and I think it'll always be that for me, and not just as a writer, but also as a lover of music in general, and seeking out that comfort through other people's music as well. But I think that's why music is so universal, is this thing that ties us all together.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I became a music journalist. I love writing, and that's kind of my my
Yeah, when
creative
did that
outlet.
start?
The writing?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I think when I was about 8, actually, I was
Wow.
writing a lot of creative writing stories. And then as I got a little older, I remember my 6th grade teacher wrote in my yearbook, like, you should think of becoming a journalist. And
Wow.
that just kind of stuck with me. It's something I always loved doing. And, but at the same time, like, music was my other passion. And I didn't know that I would end up combining the two and making a career of
So
it.
cool.
But it's, yeah, I mean, like you were saying, just getting through some hard times with music, it's just such a universal language. And
Yeah.
I just went back to my first Hollywood Bowl show since before the pandemic.
Who'd you see?
It was Duran Duran.
Amazing.
It was really fun,
Right,
great show.
An ordinary world, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Ordinary World, and a lot of Rio and Girls on Film, like all the early 80s hits
Oh,
that they
that's so
had in
fun.
videos. And it was, I'm trying to remember which song they dedicated. The Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, had just passed away, I think a couple of days before. And so they did, I think it was Save a Prayer, one of their hit songs.
Yeah.
And the whole stadium just lit, now it's not lighters, it's your phones, but the effect of, I think it's about 15,000 people in the bowl just
Yep.
filled up the sky. And, got goosebumps. And just like, music is what
So
is
powerful.
doing this. It's so powerful.
Who else did you grow up listening to?
Oh my gosh.
And who do you love right now?
Oh, those are good questions. So I grew up listening to like a lot of goth stuff, like Depeche Mode and The Cure.
No way. Oh my god, my favorites.
Yeah, they were my favorites. The Smiths are in there
course.
too. And then the Pixies was another band that I loved growing up. And then currently there's so many, and I always draw a blank, but there are a few, like Alt J is a band I'm really into.
No, Alt J.
Do you know Sophie Tucker?
Yes.
They're really fun. Actually, Sophie from Sophie Tucker was my very first podcast guest
No way.
when we launched it.
Oh my
Yeah.
god, that's so cool. It must have been so fun for you.
It was really fun.
That's awesome.
She's great and very into wellness and has, a lot of amazing practices to stay healthy while she's on tour, which is...
I would love to hear about that, because that's something I think about, like, for as somebody who has gotten so deeply immersed in, like, to the health world, and like now I have so much awareness of all of the implications, like the food that you has, on your longevity, and exercise and mental health and journaling, and all of these, like, health as an umbrella term for all of these other things. Like, I do wonder about that. I'm a very regimented person, and I've never been on tour before, and I'm going on tour next year, and I've actually been really wanting to talk to somebody about how you maintain healthy habits when you're on the road.
Oh my gosh, I think Sophie would be a great person to talk to or listen to the podcast also.
Yeah.
But I remember one of her tricks, so a couple, she I think on her rider or even maybe on her bus, she takes one of those little, I think it's a NutriBullet blender.
Yeah.
And just has like a bunch of fruit and
For
makes
smoothies.
smoothies. And then this one was good. She gets a sweet potato and just microwaves it, because a lot of hotels have microwaves, and she puts it in her fanny pack in like tinfoil.
Oh my god, that's
So she
iconic.
eats,
That's so iconic.
it's healthy
I love that.
and filling,
That's so funny.
Couple of fun
That's gonna be
tips.
me. I'm gonna be shoving sweet potatoes in my fanny packs. I love that. That's actually very inspiring for me.
Yeah. So those are some of the artists that I love. I mean, there are so many, and I guess a lot of people, sadly, I think when they start to get into their 20s, unless they're in the music industry, they start to kind of move away from music a little bit. And
Life, you get lost in the chaos.
it's true.
So much happening all the time.
And then you sort of get stuck listening to just what you loved as a kid. But
I mean, I feel the same way. I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't listen to the radio. I don't listen to... I find it really difficult to listen to new music, because the market is so oversaturated. It's just like what am I supposed to like? Where am I, like, how am I supposed to find this niche little playlist that actually resonates with me when I'm like being fed these really curated things with like a lot of political stuff happening, which is the reason why they are being shoved in my face. It's like, I don't know how to find things, new things that will really connect with me. So I always revert back to like Fleetwood Mac and Dave Matthews and Sheryl Crow and like these people that I know I can go to for my escapism.
Yeah,
and
it's comforting.
It's just comforting. Like, man, when I put on Rumors, I just feel like I'm floating away. I'm like, I'm like, who's making this and where can I find it? Because I don't think it's on New Music Friday. So lead me in the right direction.
Yeah, I had a birthday party last week, and my
Happy
friends,
belated.
thank you, and my friends, a lot of them are wonderful musicians, and they sang, I'm so bad with song titles, Go Your Own Way.
Yeah.
It was
Classic.
Beautiful. It was a wonderful way to end.
That's awesome.
And then I'm curious, just a question about storytelling. So obviously you tell stories through your music and your lyrics and what you write about, and that's so important. And I believe that it's a great way to create connection with your audience is through sharing your own stories. And you don't have to share everything, just what you feel comfortable with. But I feel like what you shared here is so inspiring. Like, you've gone through a lot, and you're being so creative, and you're about to put this like magnum opus into the world, and it's really inspiring. Is that something that you try to do consciously to maybe help others on their path? Or
I mean, I think when you love music and you know what it's done for you, like, it's hard. I tell people like what my dad does, and sometimes I think, oh my God, the lives that he is like saving and helping, and it's so significant. And I think about him and I admire him so deeply for what he does, because his life's work is only in service of other people. And sometimes I think my job is so selfish because it really is like it everything I do makes me feel better, but I also know that having friendships with other songwriters and artists, like, yes, in a way, like it is like writing in your journal every night. Which is helpful and beneficial for you, but you also remember why you started making music in the first place, and it's because music was that outlet for you, not just your music, but other people's music, and I have to remind myself of that sometimes when I feel like my job is quote unquote easy somehow, and I remember what like listening to Paramore did for me, and feeling like, oh, they're talking about my life, they're talking about and feeling less isolated in my experiences. And I think to know that my songs could have the potential and the power to do that for somebody else, that is 100% a huge reason why I write songs. And I want to keep doing that, and I only ever write from personal experience, and I am a young girl going through various phases of my young adult life, and that in itself is like the connective tissue is already there, because there's millions of other young girls going through that period of their life, and I think there's a lot of parallels between stories and feelings and emotions and hormones and all of these things that are happening at that time during your life. And so it is a form of connectedness through people, and I can only hope that people connect to my stories in whatever way they will or they do, through me talking about my experiences in my life and my emotional roller coaster of a brain and a heart.
Yeah, no, I do believe that music and art are, they're acts of service, and especially when they come from the heart, when they're done authentically, and that, the whole reason the podcast is called Stories in Harmony is that, I believe in the power of transformation through stories.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what you're doing. And it's amazing.
Thank you. And thank you for giving a space to people to talk about those things and have people receive it and hopefully gain something from it.
Yeah, that is the hope. So, Annika, where can people find you, on Instagram and TikTok and website I know that you have? Where should they look for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm everywhere. But yeah, the music will be out on the 12th. The first single, Bruises, is coming
Of
on the 12th.
October?
I'm doing, of October, I'm doing an actual 25 audio NFT drop a week from tomorrow. So on the 7th. So that's the first initial release of Bruises, and then it'll be available for mainstream sort of streaming services on the 12th. And it's just Annika Rose and Annika Rose music everywhere else.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was so fun.
Oh, for me too. Thank you so much for tuning in to Stories in Harmony podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe, and recommend us to a friend. I'm your host, Laura Ferrero, a marketing and storytelling strategist and coach. You can find out more about me at lauraferrero.co and my business, Story Harmony. Thanks again for tuning in.